Hi, and good morning, and welcome to this edition of A Conversation With. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and joining us in studio today is Jan DaSilva, the Cultural Resource Specialist for the New Bedford Whaling National Historical Park. I know, that's a long one, and I can't imagine, you know, I've never got a business card from you, but I bet you it's a long title on there, too.
It is long.
Thanks for coming in. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me.
It's Black History Month, so we wanted to talk to you about that and obviously tying it in with the park. First off, tell us a little bit about how the park has been doing during the pandemic right now.
Well, it was definitely very stressful. During the summer, we had an essential contact station where visitors could come to our garden. We had brochures. They could talk to the rangers. They could get information. But we did limit our hours from 10 to 4, Thursday through Sunday. And since November, we have taken our other entry that goes into where the elevator is, that goes up to our second floor in the Corson building, and we've turned that into a visitor's contact station. And we're open Thursday through Sunday, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. So there is a ranger on duty. You can come, you could ask questions, you can pick up brochures, you could get your National Park Service passport stamped, and you can always visit us online. And
it's always a busy place too.
Like, yeah, it's not that busy now.
I know, but I mean that's got to be just a change, different for you folks.
Yeah, it's worse than usual. Like we do collect numbers for visitor statistics, so in this kind of weather, we might only see the mailman. I mean, or the delivery person, or something like that. We're not
because even in the winter time, you guys do traditionally you do a lot of indoor events, whether it be movies or in-person events. I'm thinking of the poetry reading, Jackson Gilman there or whatever.
Yep. Well, they're still doing Whales, Tales, and Sails. It's just online.
Okay.
He's doing it on Zoom. I'm not sure if he's doing it right now. It's not one of my projects, but he had been doing it on Zoom.
Yeah.
So we tried to continue as much as we could virtually.
Yeah.
So we have a pretty robust Facebook page. We have a series now. We have Trivia Tuesday, where this is the park's 25th anniversary.
Really? Wow.
So it's a big year for us. I definitely have to mention that. So if you go to the park's website and also the park's Facebook page, you'll be seeing lots of stuff talking about the 25th anniversary. We've gotten profiles of other park alumni who've been here and left and gone on to do great things. So Emily Priggett, who was our volunteer coordinator, she was last week, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from John Pilsecker, Jen Nersessian, Frank Barrows. They'll all come through, and Josh Bowles was this week. So you will be seeing familiar faces.
Can't believe it's been 25 years, though.
I know.
I remember when the ribbon cutting. That was amazing.
Yes.
This is Black History Month, so we wanted to talk about the national park is so tied in, obviously, to the city's history, the region's history, what has happened here, and it's a great resource for that. Frederick Douglass, obviously, probably the most well-known of the historical figures when you're talking about Black history. But as you and I were talking about, there's so many more that have contributed to the city's success, the region's success, really. And it's really kind of special when you think about it.
It's definitely important to know, and I'm glad you asked me that question, and I'm happy to talk about it. And I guess I would start first with talking about the Underground Railroad and what it is, because a lot of people have an idea that they know what the Underground Railroad is, but I wanted to make sure that people get a really good working definition today. And what it is a loosely connected group of people and places. So there's like no maps, there's no railroad. The conductors were individuals in the community who were abolitionists, who were committed to anti-slavery, and if somebody needed help, they were able to help them. Commonly people think about tunnels and secret rooms and basements, and that's not necessarily true, because you wouldn't really have someone there. And was a secret. I mean, most people were not going to know about it because it'd be easy to pick up people if everyone knew whose house to go to get people.
Right.
So it was very secretive, very few tunnels. Everybody in New Bedford always talks about the tunnels, and the tunnels were probably big water tunnels. I'm not sure what they were used for, but
Right.
I don't think they were used to transfer formerly enslaved people to houses.
How, before we get to the folks, and I know you've got some folks that we want to talk about, how come New Bedford? Why did it become a magnet for the Underground Railroad?
I mean, we always, at the park, we always say it's several reasons. One, it had a very deep harbor, so there was that big connection to water. So people were able to escape by water, you know, hide away on a boat, come up. They had a large African American community, so you're kind of like hidden in plain sight. Nobody knew who you were. You could come up here and change your name and people would protect you. There was a large Quaker community, which they became Unitarians, so this is probably one of the first Unitarian communities too. But so some of the Quakers in New Bedford, or many of the Quakers in New Bedford, were anti-slavery, so that was something where people who were formerly enslaved felt safe with Quakers. Let's see what else.
But it was, I mean, New Bedford's history is with that is really good. I mean, it's impactful, really.
Right, and people were sent here. I mean, that's what we can talk about that too. The fact that when people got to Philadelphia, they might have been sent by William Still up to New Bedford, or if they went to New York, they might have been sent to New Bedford by David Ruggles. And both of them were African American conductors on the Underground Railroad, and they knew where they could send people because they could get jobs, or maybe they had family. A lot of people who escaped from slavery in New Bedford had family members here, so it wasn't a foreign place to them. There were a lot of family connections, and I'll get into some of those. But you know.
Yeah, so start talking. I mean, mention a few of the people here too that we're talking about here, and the Underground Railroad really is a fascinating story. But there's a lot of people that really, I think, folks would want to know about.
Right. Well, some of these people came via the Underground Railroad.
Right.
So I know we talked about Lewis Temple, and I was going to mention him because he came from Richmond, Virginia. We think he was formerly enslaved. He was a blacksmith. He came up here and worked. He had a family. One of the things he would do was because New Bedford's a whaling community, there was a need for ways to catch the whale.
Right.
So there were toggle irons. Toggle irons changed in shape, size, configuration during that period. And what Lewis Temple did was create a toggle, so when the harpoon went into the whale, the toggle rotated, so that way it got caught in the whale's blubber and it wouldn't come out. Because a lot of times harpoons might have been hit, the whale would have gotten hit, but there was nothing to keep the harpoon in the whale.
Right.
So they could lose as many whales as they caught. So his invention revolutionized the whaling industry.
Right, changed it forever.
It totally
really.
changed it forever.
I think that, but isn't, and then the whaleman statue downtown, I think that has what you're talking about. The toggle, right.
Yeah. The Temple created in 1848. So after 1848, he didn't patent it, so he never got the credit or the money, but other people copied it, and I think that just became the standard harpoon after 1848. It had a toggle on it, and that's one reason why they could capture so many more whales after than before.
That's an amazing story when you think about it, how that one person can change an entire industry like that.
Right. And his, one of the things that we do at the Park Service is history, and because I'm an architectural historian and I love history, for me it's always about the places and looking at the places and seeing how they relate to the story. So Waypoint Event Center, which is down by
right off of Route 18.
Yeah, right off of Route 18.
Yep.
It was a whale oil refinery, but on the site or adjacent to the site was also where we believe Lewis Temple's blacksmithery was, right on Walnut Street, which was right down the street from where he lived. And it's interesting when you start putting all these things in connection with where they were during that time, and you can see how the town worked. Like, you know, all the business people were right here, and the shoreside industries were right there, and they were all adjacent to the water, and they all knew each other. That's the part I like about history, being able to tell the stories and put them in perspective and seeing how things work. I mean, we don't capture that when we talk about history, so most people think it's dry and boring and dull. But you have to think about, these people all knew people. Who did they know? Who did they know? Imagine Lewis Temple walking down from his house and just saying, "Hi, how are you doing?" to, I'm trying to think of someone in the Roach family, or Hetty Green's grandfather or father, because they're all in the same area.
And that's the thing, is you have to picture too the waterfront, or 1848. Picture that versus what you see now downtown. I mean, a lot of those buildings are still there, but it's still
totally different.
Different view.
And I always tell people when they come visit, make sure you go to the Whaling Museum so you could get a sense of what it smelled like, because that whale carcass skeleton that they have is still dripping oil.
Right.
So when you walk in, you get the smell of the whale oil, and that's how New Bedford smelled.
Jan DaSilva is our guest here from the New Bedford Whaling National Historical Park. We're talking about Black History Month. Some of the other folks that you wanted to brief us on too.
Okay, sure. I have my notes here. So it's like lots of stuff we could talk about. And when we were talking about Lewis Temple, he came as part of kind of like a family unit, where he was married to a Clark, and other members of her family came up here from DC. One of her relatives was Archibald Clark, and Lucinda were her brother and sister. Lucinda married William Bush, who was from the DC area. We can talk about the Pearl a little bit. In 1848, there was this is another New Bedford story, Daniel Drayton, who was a sea captain, wanted to emancipate some enslaved people. He decided to do it by water. In 1848, there were people who wanted to escape slavery. We believe he had a connection to Lucinda Bush, that she was a conductor on the Underground Railroad. So Daniel Drayton got a boat. He wound up having 77 passengers on his boat, but they got caught. And he was going to sail up the Chesapeake onto the Delaware River, go out and come up. I don't know where he was going to land, but
he probably didn't know either.
He probably didn't either. Yeah. But you know, one of the problems for him was that there was no wind, so the ship kind of stalled in the river, and they were able to capture them. He got caught. He went to jail. He eventually was freed, but he lost his livelihood. He lost his family. He wound up coming to New Bedford in 1857 to meet William Bush, because he still was a friend of the Bush family. Yep. Went to the Mansion House, and he wound up killing himself there. But that's another Underground Railroad story. So he was connected to the Bush family. They made sure he was buried in Rural Cemetery. So he's buried here in New Bedford, and the Bush family, continued on with their Underground Railroad connections. And another member of their family was Leonard Grimes, who came up here, who also went to jail for assisting fugitives. And he came to New Bedford, lived here about 3 years, and then he went to Boston and formed the 12th Baptist Church. Wow. So we have a lot of connections to other communities pertaining to the Underground Railroad, which I think we take for granted. We either don't know, or we don't recognize, or we're not sure, or we don't link all the stories together. And that's what I like, the linking of the stories together.
The research, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of people don't know just the stories. And it takes time. It takes,
you gotta look.
You got to be interested in it.
Right.
But there's a lot of interesting stories that, I mean, when you look at New Bedford's history, that really changed the city.
Right. Right. I know we talked about the Piper family, and they lived on Bedford Street too, and they were involved in. They came from Virginia too. I don't know what their status was, whether they were free or formerly enslaved. But they came here, and they did participate in the Underground Railroad.
So that's Amelia, I think, right?
Amelia Piper,
and
but
her
the
husband.
whole family, it was William and Amelia. They were
Right,
from
the
Virginia.
husband and wife. Yep.
And then their children were Robert, Philip, Sarah Ann, Amelia, and Augustus. They were all born in Virginia, so they all came up here. And then the daughter Rebecca was born in New Bedford. One of so they were very involved in abolitionism too. And there were organizations that people belonged to, such as the, oh God, I'm trying to find it. I had it right here. I had a list of women who signed a petition for Negro Seamen's Acts of Carolinas in Georgia. It was signed by 107 women of color in 1837. And some of the names on this list were from New Bedford: Nancy King, Mahalia Lawton, Lucy Pennington, Avis Williams, Leah Fletcher, Martha Bailey, Cynthia Potts, Amelia Piper, Amelia J. Piper, Sarah Ann Rocher, and Violet Corey. So they were all from New Bedford, and they signed this document. Polly Johnson, I know we
Right.
talk about Nathan and Polly Johnson. The Johnson House is on 7th Street. Polly Johnson was also very active in the abolitionist movement too. You know, she, not only did they use their house, they housed the Gibson family, who came up here from Georgia, I believe. The father, Patrick Gibson, was a white man, owned slaves, but had children with a formerly enslaved woman. He sent them up here because he wanted the children to be educated. He sent them to stay with Nathan Johnson. And this was actually before, I think, before Frederick Douglass came up to New Bedford. And
you said something that I thought was really interesting to me on the phone when we were talking about this. There are things before Frederick Douglass came here, as
Right.
you were talking about.
Right.
The reason, there's a reason Frederick Douglass came here, and
Right.
there are people that started the abolitionist movement and what have you before the Douglass story begins.
right, there are. Because the Gibson family came, I believe it was like, I don't have the date here, but I think it's 1837, 1838. And you know, Nathan protected them and kept them from going into slavery because Patrick died. Family members wanted the Gibson ladies to go back down south, where they probably would sell them to Jamaica or some other place. They were free up here. Would they go back to slavery? Nathan wound up facing a lot of angst and recriminations from the community because he refused to give them up.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that people were sending him letters, sending them back, but he smelled something a little fishy. He said, I'm not going to do it. And there were letters in the paper talking about his behavior, and he took a blow to his integrity based on that. But he wound up being right, you know, that they probably would have been sold back into slavery, or they would have been sold, and they weren't technically free.
Right.
One thing that people may not realize, like in Georgia, that no slaveholder could emancipate his slaves. It was against the law to do that.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah. You
Because you
practically-
read about, I guess not specifically Georgia, but you read about there are some.
Yeah, but not some states. You can't do
You
it.
just can't do it.
You just can't do it. It's not legal.
We talked about Paul Cuffey too, as another one who.
Yep. Yeah, Paul Cuffey was actually local because his father was purchased by the Slocum family in the 1700s. Paul was born in 1759. His mother, Ruth, was a Wampanoag woman. And there were multiple children. They lived in Westport. Paul lived in Westport, but I think he was born on Cuttyhunk. But they lived in Westport, and he was Afro-Indian mariner. I found out something interesting about him the other day, which was in 1780, 83, can't remember the date. In the same year, he did a petition to the Massachusetts legislature petitioning for the right to vote.
Oh, wow.
In February, it was February and December. So one petition, he petitioned as an African American. One petition, he petitioned as a indigenous person. because he was both.
Right.
And so he and his brother were petitioning to get the vote, and I know they were turned down in both instances, but the fact that he was willing to go through the Commonwealth legislature and try to get that, it didn't work. But he had a store in New Bedford. There's been a lot about him recently. I'm trying not to advertise everybody, but you know, there are different exhibits about Paul Cuffey around the city. People should feel free to go take a look at some of them.
You know, it's interesting because you mentioned that there are people who sent people up here because they wanted to get educated and what have you, but it does sound like, certainly not in every case, but it does sound like there were, for lack of a better word, opportunities.
Yes.
For African American or to get a leg up, I guess is the word.
Well, there were. I mean, there were perceived opportunities. I think everybody felt that there were some, and I'm going to go back to the Johnsons a quick second because I do want people to be aware of the fact that the Park Service and New Bedford Historical Society worked together to do a virtual tour of the Nathan and Polly Johnson house. It's on the Park Service website. It's about 4 minutes, but it explains exactly how the house was used, because the house is interesting. Polly actually put the front addition that we see today on it in the 1850s. So it didn't look like that when Frederick Douglass came there, but it is the site of where he came.
Right.
So I know we weren't going to talk too much about Frederick Douglass, but he did come to New Bedford because of the opportunities. That was exactly why he came, because he was a caulker. So they said, oh, you know, go to New Bedford. They have a huge seaport. There's lots of boats for you to work on.
Right.
And then he went down to the waterfront. He wasn't able to get a job because of his color.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
But yet, in the same token, like when you look at the Lewis Temple as a blacksmith,
he was able to.
He was able to.
I think probably because maybe he was working alone.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. You know, blacksmiths don't really work with other people. And with Douglass, it was because the other caulkers refused to work on the boats with him. But a blacksmith, you know, you're hammering the iron in the forge by yourself. You might have helpers, but you're not really working with other people. This is me surmising this.
Right. But even the thought of getting educated is a crazy thought for, I guess, when you think of the people back then. Like, really, I have a chance to learn how to read and write?
Right. And I have a chance to be free and not get captured and and have a life and be productive and use some of my skills that I have. Yeah, it's an amazing thing that people were able to do that.
What about some of the other folks that I know you had a good long list of folks?
I did. I do have a long list. So, you know, this is a family I'm interested in, and I don't know of anybody who's really done any research, but I will mention them because maybe somebody will get the idea. The Johnson family. There's a Richard Johnson who married Ruth Cuffey Howard. So he married Ruth Cuffey, who was one of Paul Cuffey's sisters.
Okay.
She married someone else afterwards. He had 2 sons that I know about that I'm going to mention, Richard C. and Ezra. They were both very actively involved in the abolitionist movement. And I think one of them went to California. One of the things that happened in 1849 with the California gold rush, because opportunities were not as great as perceived by black men, they all went west. Even Nathan Johnson went west.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He was in California. He was in California, I don't know, maybe from 1850 to 1872.
Wow. I never knew that. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So he only came home because he had heard Polly died. She died in 1871. And in her will, she said, Nathan can come stay in the house as long as he arrives here within 2 years of my death.
Stipulation.
I know. But he did it. He came back. He was back in New Bedford by 1873. He died in New Bedford in 1880 or 1881. And he's buried in New Bedford. So he did it.
Right. Wow, I never knew that.
Yeah.
Another person I thought was interesting, too, was William Carney.
Yes.
And you and I were talking about him off camera before.
Yeah.
Civil War hero.
Right. He's the first African American to earn the Medal of Honor. He didn't receive it until 1900.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
I was going to say that's they don't just hand those out.
No, they don't. You have to earn it. You have to be somebody has to nominate you, and they have to find whatever you did to be valuable enough to have earned the Medal of Honor. And so he did earn it for his gallantry, his behavior at Fort Wagner, and not letting the flag touch the ground.
Right.
You know, and he got shot several times, so he was injured. And he says he only did his duty. He never let the flag touch the ground. But he's another person who was formerly enslaved who self-emancipated himself. His father had, they're from Virginia too, and his father had come to New Bedford in the 1850s, and at some point he, the rest of the family came up to New Bedford too by 1858. So he was up here by the time he was 18 years old. It's, you know, one of the places you can get a lot of information is from William Still's The Underground Railroad. And William Still was an African-American, basically, I'll call him a historian because that's what he did. But he was an Underground Railroad conductor, and people were sent to him by other conductors. He was in Philadelphia, so it was like the first stop to freedom.
Right.
And he would write down their stories. And he, amazingly, when you think about it, the fact that we have as many as we have because he kept them secret, because something like that is, if a slave catcher got that information, what could they do with it? I mean, they could go and find a lot
there
of
are so many
people.
You think the people who are risking their lives too.
Right.
No, and I'm not talking the slaves. I'm
No, but
talking
the other people.
the conductors, if
Yes.
you will.
They are risking their lives, and that was something else I kind of wanted to mention. I'm glad you brought that up because, you know, in today's world, everybody always says, "Oh, I could be an abolitionist. I'm that person," and I always say, I'm not even sure I'm that person, and I look like the people who were. I want to believe I'm that person,
right?
But it's dangerous. You're risking your life, your livelihood, your family, everything you own to help other people.
Well, those are the stories that restore your faith in mankind.
Yeah, they do. They do.
That there are people out there at that time that are like that.
They do. But my point is that they're just not that common.
No, and that's what I'm saying, yeah.
And that's where I think we all need to think hard about what we would do in terms of those things, because it's a dangerous thing. I mean,
well,
they're
especially at
risking
this
their
day and
lives.
age.
Well, we have things happening today that are just like that. So we
no,
should
right,
be able
and you know, do we do enough?
Right.
It's a rhetorical question. I don't have the answer.
Right, and that's what I started asking myself. Like, what am I doing? It's easy to figure it out what side of history you will be on when you can see something happening like that during your time too. Because a lot of people want to believe they'd be on the right side of history, and I'm just pointing it out, not because I'm trying to make people feel badly.
I understand completely.
I want people to understand how much of a risk it was for people to help people for the Underground Railroad. It wasn't that common.
We are out of time.
Are we really?
It was great seeing you.
Oh my God. You're right.
We haven't done
I mean,
talk.
you said it was going to be
We
quick.
haven't had to talk like this in a long time.
I know.
But we will continue this. I'd like to bring in maybe next month too, with Women's History Month coming up, because you were talking about a totally other program that you were talking about.
Yeah, with women. I mean, I did a program at the Whaling Museum. It was just on women during the Civil War and names, because there's a lot of women who came up here who were formerly enslaved too.
So to be continued.
Yep.
For folks who have questions, why don't you just give out the website or the email address?
The website is nps.gov/NEBE, and my email address is JANINE_DA_SILVA@nps.gov.
That's a lot.
It's a lot.
It's great seeing you, though.
Good seeing you
Thanks for coming
too.
in.
Thank you.
That's going to do it for this edition. It'll be a to be continued, that's for sure, because we'll be back. So thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.